You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your educational journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. International transfers sit at the intersection of global commerce, privacy law, and national security concerns. Organizations regularly move personal data across borders for cloud hosting, shared services, outsourcing, or analytics. Yet, these flows are tightly scrutinized because once data leaves its origin jurisdiction, it becomes subject to different laws and government access practices. The European Union in particular has been central in shaping the modern debate with its adequacy decisions, contractual safeguards, and judicial rulings that have redefined what lawful transfer means. For exam candidates, the key concept is risk-based assurance. Transfers are not unlawful by default, but they must be supported by mechanisms that demonstrate compliance and protect individuals' rights. Scenarios may test whether contracts alone suffice, with the correct recognition being no technical, organizational, and legal safeguards must combine to create defensible accountability across borders. The Schrems 1 decision in 2015 marked a turning point in international transfers. The case, brought by Austrian privacy advocate Max Schrems, challenged the adequacy of the US-EU safe harbor framework. The European Court of Justice ruled that safe harbor failed to protect EU citizens' data because US surveillance practices lacked proportionality and did not provide effective redress for Europeans. This invalidated a mechanism relied upon by thousands of companies, forcing them to scramble for alternative safeguards. For exam candidates, the key concept is adequacy invalidation. A framework once approved was struck down as incompatible with EU rights. Scenarios may test whether safe harbor remains a valid transfer tool, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that adequacy frameworks can be challenged and overturned, reinforcing the importance of monitoring legal developments and maintaining fallback safeguards. Schrems 2, decided in 2020, reinforced these principles with even greater impact. The case invalidated the Privacy Shield framework, safe harbor successor, again due to U.S. surveillance practices and insufficient redress for EU citizens. However, unlike Schrems 1, the court upheld the validity of Standard Contractual Clauses, provided organizations conduct transfer impact assessments to evaluate risks in destination countries. For exam candidates, the key concept is conditionality. SCCs remain valid only if supported by risk assessments and supplementary safeguards. Scenarios may test whether SCCs can be used without analysis of local law, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that Schrems 2 reshaped transfers into a risk-based regime, requiring organizations to actively evaluate and mitigate exposure rather than relying on formalistic compliance. Standard Contractual Clauses serve as the most widely used safeguard for transfers outside adequacy jurisdictions. SCCs are pre-approved contractual templates issued by the European Commission that impose obligations on exporters and importers to protect personal data consistently with EU expectations. They create enforceable rights for individuals and bind recipients to accountability. For exam candidates, the key concept is default safeguard. Scenarios may test whether SCCs can be modified freely by companies, with the correct recognition being no. Only non-conflicting business terms can be added. Recognizing this underscores that SCCs are standardized tools. They provide portability and predictability, but require organizations to embed them properly, flow them down to sub-processors, and back them with technical and organizational controls to ensure real-world effectiveness. Transfer impact assessments, or TIAs, are now a central accountability artifact. They require exporters to evaluate the legal landscape of the recipient country, focusing on surveillance laws, government access practices, and availability of redress. TIAs also weigh the sensitivity of data, volume, and risk context. If local laws are deemed to compromise protection, organizations must adopt supplementary safeguards. For exam candidates, the key concept is risk evaluation. Scenarios may test whether SCCs can be used without TIAs, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability under Schrems 2 requires documented TIAs, proving that exporters considered risks deliberately and implemented proportionate mitigations rather than assuming transfers are safe by default. Supplementary measures address gaps identified in TIAs by adding technical, contractual, or organizational protections. Examples include encrypting data in transit and at rest, with keys controlled in the EU, limiting access to only what is necessary, and enforcing minimization to reduce the scope of data exposed. Contractual commitments may prohibit onward disclosures without consent, while organizational safeguards include transparency reporting and audit rights. For exam candidates, the key concept is mitigation layering. Scenarios may test whether encryption alone guarantees compliance, with the correct recognition being no. It must be combined with governance and contractual safeguards. Recognizing this emphasizes that international transfers are defensible only when multiple measures work together to create a resilient shield against undue access. The EU-U.S. Data Privacy Framework, or DPF, launched in 2023, aims to replace Privacy Shield and restore a lawful path for U.S. transfers. The DPF includes commitments from the U.S. government to limit surveillance practices and establish independent redress through a data protection review court. Organizations must certify with the U.S. Department of Commerce and commit to detailed obligations around transparency, accountability, and enforcement. For exam candidates, the key concept is conditional participation. Only certified companies may rely on DPF. Scenarios may test whether mere U.S. presence qualifies organizations automatically, with the correct recognition being no formal participation is required. Recognizing this underscores that adequacy frameworks are fragile but vital, offering streamlined transfers only when governments and companies sustain enforceable commitments. Onward transfer controls extend accountability through the entire chain of processing. If an importer relies on sub-processors or onward recipients, contractual obligations must ensure equivalent safeguards. This prevents dilution of protections when data flows beyond the initial recipient. For exam purposes, the key concept is chain accountability. Scenarios may test whether SCCs stop at the first importer, with the correct recognition being no, they must be flowed down. Recognizing this highlights that accountability extends across networks of processors and sub-processors, ensuring protections promised at the start of a transfer are preserved consistently throughout the life cycle of the data abroad. Binding corporate rules, or BCRs, provide a customized mechanism for multinational groups to transfer data internally. Approved by regulators, BCRs set out binding commitments across affiliates, aligning internal practices with EU requirements. While resource-intensive to develop and obtain, BCRs provide long-term stability for large organizations. For exam candidates, the key concept is intra-group assurance. Scenarios may test whether BCRs apply to external vendors, with the correct recognition being no, they apply only within a corporate group. Recognizing this underscores that BCRs are not a universal transfer tool, but an effective option for global enterprises seeking regulatory-approved, consistent privacy governance across subsidiaries. Derogations allow transfers without SCCs or frameworks in specific, limited situations. Examples include explicit consent, performance of a contract, or important public interest. However, derogations cannot be relied upon for repetitive or large-scale transfers. They are designed for exceptional circumstances. For exam candidates, the key concept is limitation. Scenarios may test whether consent alone can sustain ongoing large-scale transfers, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that derogations must be used sparingly and documented carefully, ensuring organizations do not overextend exceptions and compromise accountability in cross-border practices. Government access risks are central to Schrems decisions and transfer viability. Organizations must assess the proportionality of surveillance laws in recipient countries and whether data subjects have meaningful remedies. Where risks exist, supplementary safeguards must strengthen protections. For exam candidates, the key concept is proportionality. Scenarios may test whether the mere possibility of government access prohibits transfers, with the correct recognition being no. It depends on law, likelihood, and safeguards. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires nuanced analysis of access risks, demonstrating that decisions were reasoned, mitigations applied, and proportionality considered transparently. Redress mechanisms provide individuals with avenues to challenge misuse or unlawful access to their data. Frameworks like DPF establish independent review bodies, while SCCs require recipients to grant enforceable rights. Organizations must disclose recourse mechanisms and notices and respond to complaints transparently. For exam candidates, the key concept is enforceability. Rights must not be theoretical, but actionable. Scenarios may test whether redress must be available to all individuals, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this highlights that accountability in transfers requires not only safeguards against risks, but also mechanisms that empower individuals to act if protections fail. Vendor due diligence ensures that processors handling cross-border transfers meet technical and contractual obligations. Exporters must confirm where data is stored, which jurisdictions are involved, and what controls are applied. This includes validating data center locations, encryption practices, and legal commitments. For exam candidates, the key concept is assurance through diligence. Scenarios may test whether vendor claims alone suffice, with the correct recognition being no evidence is required. Recognizing this underscores that accountability extends to verifying third parties, ensuring exporters remain responsible for lawful transfers even when processors manage the infrastructure. Data localization pressures challenge organizations to design architectures that satisfy conflicting global requirements. Some countries mandate that personal data remain within borders, while others allow transfers with safeguards. Multinational organizations must decide whether to localize data physically, use regional cloud zones, or adopt hybrid models. For exam candidates, the key concept is residency choice. Scenarios may test whether localization always ensures compliance, with the correct recognition being no. It must still align with privacy and security expectations. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires careful design decisions balancing operational efficiency with regulatory localization mandates. Transparency expectations extend to informing individuals about transfer destinations and safeguards. Privacy notices must specify categories of data transferred, purposes, safeguards applied, and available rights. Generic statements like, "We may transfer data abroad," no longer suffice. For exam candidates, the key concept is disclosure. Scenarios may test whether organizations must disclose transfer destinations, with the correct recognition being yes. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires empowering individuals with clear, accurate information about where their data travels and how it remains protected in foreign jurisdictions. Documentation practices tie the accountability model together by creating evidence of transfer compliance. Organizations must maintain records of decisions, completed TIAs, supplementary safeguards, and contractual commitments. These records must be available to regulators upon request, demonstrating proactive diligence. For exam candidates, the key concept is defensibility. Scenarios may test whether undocumented transfer decisions satisfy accountability, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability in transfers is about producing durable, accessible documentation showing organizations considered risks, applied safeguards, and made transparent, defensible choices in handling personal data across borders. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. The allocation of roles between controllers and processors is fundamental in managing international transfers. Controllers determine the purposes and means of processing and are primarily responsible for ensuring lawful transfer mechanisms are in place. Processors, meanwhile, act on documented instructions but still carry obligations to implement appropriate safeguards. such as technical measures and contractual commitments. This allocation clarifies who performs transfer impact assessments, who drafts and enforces standard contractual clauses, and who must respond to regulator inquiries. For exam candidates, the key concept is divided responsibility. While controllers carry the heaviest compliance burden, processors cannot operate passively. Scenarios may test whether controllers alone are accountable for transfer safeguards, with the correct recognition being no processors must also demonstrate adherence. Recognizing this underscores that accountability in transfers requires shared diligence across all parties, with roles and responsibilities transparently defined and documented. Contractual flowdown of standard contractual clauses ensures that obligations apply not only to direct importers, but also to all sub-processors handling personal data. If a European exporter relies on SCCs with a U.S. vendor, that vendor must impose equivalent clauses on its downstream partners to maintain continuity of protection. Flowdown requires verification mechanisms such as audit rights and due diligence to confirm sub-processors are not weak links. For exam candidates, the key concept is chain of custody. Protections must persist throughout the transfer chain. Scenarios may test whether SCCs bind only first-tier recipients, with the correct recognition being no, they must extend to all relevant sub-processors. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires organizations to prove safeguards are consistently applied across the entire ecosystem of service providers, not just direct contractual partners. Key management models in cloud contexts illustrate the technical challenges of cross-border safeguards. Organizations may rely on vendor-controlled keys, customer-controlled keys, or hybrid bring-your-own-key arrangements. BYOK models increase control by allowing data exporters to manage encryption keys, reducing risks of foreign government access. However, feasibility depends on vendor support and technical integration. For exam candidates, the key concept is control over decryption. Scenarios may test whether vendor-held keys always satisfy supplementary safeguard requirements, with the correct recognition being no customer control is often preferred. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires technical evaluation of encryption models, documenting whether key ownership and lifecycle management adequately reduce risks of surveillance or unauthorized access abroad. Pseudonymization and split processing patterns reduce exposure by distributing identifiable data elements across jurisdictions. For example, identifiers may remain in the EU while pseudonymized behavioral data is processed abroad for analytics. Split processing ensures that re-identification requires access to both datasets, adding resilience against unauthorized use. However, accountability requires proving that pseudonymization techniques are robust and re-identification risks are minimized. For exam candidates, the key concept is partitioning risk. Scenarios may test whether pseudonymization automatically exempts transfers from scrutiny, with the correct recognition being no risk must still be assessed. Recognizing this underscores that technical innovations can mitigate risks, but must be combined with contractual and organizational safeguards to satisfy regulatory expectations. Monitoring for legal changes is an ongoing obligation in the international transfer landscape. Because frameworks like DPF or adequacy decisions can be challenged, organizations must stay informed of regulatory guidance, case law, and enforcement actions. SCC templates themselves may be updated, requiring organizations to refresh contracts and reassess safeguards. For exam candidates, the key concept is continuous vigilance. Scenarios may test whether transfer compliance is static once contracts are signed, with the correct recognition being no monitoring is required. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability in transfers demands ongoing review, ensuring organizations can adapt quickly to evolving legal interpretations, minimizing disruption, and avoiding reliance on invalidated or outdated mechanisms. Incident handling in cross-border contexts requires coordination across multiple jurisdictions with different breach definitions and timelines. A data breach in the United States involving EU data subjects may trigger obligations under both U.S. state laws and GDPR's 72-hour reporting requirement. Organizations must coordinate forensic investigations, legal analysis, and notifications to regulators and individuals in each affected jurisdiction. For exam purposes, the key concept is harmonization under pressure. Scenarios may test whether one jurisdiction's rules suffice, with the correct recognition being no, all applicable regimes must be considered. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires mature incident response programs capable of operating across borders, ensuring timeliness, consistency, and defensibility in multi-jurisdiction breach scenarios. Data subject rights fulfillment across borders complicates accountability because identifiers may be distributed across jurisdictions and vendors. Organizations must ensure that requests for access, deletion, correction, or portability can be honored even when processing occurs abroad. This requires mapping identifiers, verifying identities securely, and coordinating with processors in foreign jurisdictions. For exam candidates, the key concept is enforceability across boundaries. Scenarios may test whether rights obligations apply only domestically, with the correct recognition being no. They extend wherever personal data travels. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires technical and organizational systems capable of routing and fulfilling requests globally, ensuring rights are respected regardless of data geography. Records of processing and mapping alignment with transfer registries provide traceability for cross-border data flows. Exporters must document which categories of data, purposes, and legal mechanisms apply to each transfer, maintaining logs that align with Article 30 records under GDPR. These records support TIAs, audits, and regulator reviews, proving that transfers are not ad hoc but part of structured governance. For exam candidates, the key concept is documentation as evidence. Scenarios may test whether undocumented transfers can be justified later, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires complete, current documentation linking processing records to transfer registries, ensuring visibility and defensibility at all times. Testing of technical measures strengthens accountability by ensuring safeguards function against real-world threats. Encryption, pseudonymization, and access controls must be tested through penetration exercises, red teaming, or simulations of government access attempts. This validates that supplementary measures are not theoretical but effective. For exam purposes, the key concept is operational assurance. Scenarios may test whether untested measures suffice as safeguards, with the correct recognition being no testing is required. Recognizing this underscores that accountability depends on verifying protections in practice, ensuring technical controls meaningfully reduce risks of surveillance, interception, or unauthorized use in destination countries. Accountability artifacts compile all relevant evidence for international transfers, including completed TIAs, SCC contracts, policies, board-level approvals, and monitoring logs. These artifacts provide regulators with proof that compliance was deliberate and structured. They also support executive oversight by giving leaders visibility into risks and mitigations. For exam candidates, the key concept is evidentiary completeness. Scenarios may test whether undocumented decisions satisfy accountability, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires not only implementing safeguards but also producing comprehensive artifacts that demonstrate governance, foresight, and defensibility in transfer operations. The UK's International Data Transfer Agreement and Addendum reflect post-Brexit divergence, requiring organizations to adopt UK-specific contractual tools or appendices alongside EU SCCs. While largely aligned, nuances exist, such as regulator oversight by the Information Commissioner's Office. For exam candidates, the key concept is jurisdictional parallelism. Scenarios may test whether EU SCCs alone suffice for UK transfers, with the correct recognition being no UK instruments are required. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires tailoring transfer mechanisms to specific jurisdictions, even when frameworks share common principles, ensuring compliance across both EU and UK regimes. Swiss transfers present similar but distinct considerations. Switzerland recognizes EU SCCs but applies its own adequacy rules and regulator expectations. Local nuances, such as inclusion of Swiss-specific clauses, may be required. For exam candidates, the key lesson is nuance. Scenarios may test whether EU adequacy alone guarantees compliance for Swiss transfers, with the correct recognition being no Swiss specifics apply. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires recognizing parallel but distinct frameworks, adapting contracts and safeguards accordingly, ensuring lawful and defensible transfers across all European jurisdictions. Sector overlays intensify accountability requirements for transfers involving regulated data. Health records may require HIPAA alignment, financial data may trigger banking secrecy rules, and children's data may require parental consent or strict retention controls. These overlays mean that organizations cannot rely solely on SCCs or frameworks. They must also ensure sector-specific obligations are embedded into contracts, safeguards, and monitoring. For exam candidates, the key concept is layered compliance. Scenarios may test whether SCCs alone suffice for health data transfers, with the correct recognition being no HIPAA and equivalent laws still apply. Recognizing this highlights that accountability requires tailoring safeguards to both cross-border rules and industry overlays simultaneously. Exit strategies provide resilience when frameworks change or vendors no longer meet obligations. Plans must cover repatriation of data to local infrastructure, secure deletion of foreign copies, and transition to alternative safeguards. Documenting exit strategies ensures that organizations are not locked into unlawful or risky transfers if adequacy is revoked or vendors fail. For exam purposes, the key concept is contingency. Scenarios may test whether exit planning is optional, with the correct recognition being no. Recognizing this emphasizes that accountability requires foresight. Organizations must prepare to pivot quickly, maintaining lawful operations even in volatile regulatory landscapes. By synthesizing legal mechanisms, technical safeguards, and operational diligence, international transfer programs provide resilience in an uncertain global environment. For exam candidates, the synthesis is clear. Accountability requires risk-based assessments, supplementary measures, and continuous monitoring, all documented in defensible artifacts. Recognizing this emphasizes that lawful transfers depend on balancing law, technology, and governance, ensuring personal data is protected across borders while supporting the realities of global commerce. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.